Hello and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. When you're ready to build your next pipeline or want to test out the projects you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out our friends over at Linode. With 200 gigabit private networking, scalable shared block storage, and a 40 gigabit public network, you've got everything you need to run a fast, reliable, and bulletproof data platform. If you need global distribution, they've got that covered too, with worldwide data centers, including new ones in Toronto and Mumbai. And for your machine learning workloads, they just announced dedicated CPU instances. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Linode, that's Linode today to get a $20 credit and launch a new server in under a minute. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. And you listen to this show to learn and stay up to date with what's happening in databases, streaming platforms, big data, and everything else you need to know about modern data management. For even more opportunities to meet, listen, and learn from your peers, you don't want to miss out on this year's conference season. We have partnered with organizations such as O'Reilly Media, Dataversity, Corinium Global Intelligence, and Data Council. Upcoming events include the O'Reilly AI Conference, the Strata Data Conference, the combined events of the Data Architecture Summit and Graph Forum, and Data Council in Barcelona. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/conferences to learn more about these and other events and take advantage of our partner discounts to save money when you register today. Your host is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing Tom Goldenberg about Kedro, an open-source development workflow tool that helps structure reproducible, scalable, deployable, and robust and versioned data pipelines. So, Tom, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, Tobias. First of all, thanks for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm a junior principal data engineer at Quantum Black, which is a McKinsey company. I'm based out of the Cambridge, Massachusetts office, and happy to share a little bit about myself or Kedro. Or where would you like to start first, Tobias?
Let's start by, if you can remember how you first got involved in the area of data management, telling us a bit about that story.
Sure. So it's interesting. I've been in the tech scene for quite a while. I started out working with a couple of startups in New York City. That's kind of where I got my start. One of the first startups I worked with was a company called Agolo, and they are a Microsoft-backed AI company. And at the time, I wasn't heavily involved in I would call it like the data science aspect of it, but I was always very intrigued by it. So I moved on from there. I co-founded a startup and was CTO of a fintech asset management startup. And it wasn't really until I got into consulting where I had the opportunity to basically play a leading role on a large-scale analytics transformation. And this was for a client in the retail industry. And it was then that I kind of discover that I really enjoy this. I definitely see the huge impact it has on the client at the time. And so that's why I eventually joined Quantum Black here at McKinsey to work with clients, Fortune 500 clients, and to help them, transform and adapt and use these technologies to improve their organizations.
And through the work that you and your colleagues are doing at Quantum Black, you ended up creating this framework in the form of Kedro. So I'm wondering if you can describe a bit about what it is and some of the use cases that it enabled and some of the origin story of how it got started.
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer that. So first of all, I did not create Kedro. I'm an avid user of Kedro and a big fan, but there are lots of people involved out of London, Quantum Black's London office primarily, but also here in the United States. Basically, Kedro, the word Kedro is Greek for center. It's essentially, the idea is it's essentially the center of your data pipeline. And what it is and what it offers you, to really boil it down and simplify, the basic thing that it offers you is a template, kind of a boilerplate for how to start a data science, data engineering project in Python. And that's the core of it, what it offers. And from there, it offers kind of an organization of the code, the concept of data layers to organize your the data that you're using. And then there's a whole abstraction layer that it offers for the data sets that you use, and as well as tools for both visualizing and in organizing your data pipeline. I hope that clarifies. Happy to dig in any of those points to clarify a little bit more.
Yeah, it's definitely a useful overview, and it seems that it was designed to span the disciplines between data engineers and data scientists to serve as the focal point for collaboration and enabling the overall life cycle of a data project. I'm wondering if you can dig into some of the ways that each of those different roles factor into the overall workflow and life cycle of a project that's being built on top of Kedro.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great that you call that out. Listen, in big data projects, you have data engineering and you have data science. And, by the name of this podcast, we all know that data engineering is a huge chunk of what goes into driving the insights of machine learning and data science. The statistic is quoted pretty often that data engineering is 80% of it. And so, yeah, what Kedro really emphasizes is that collaboration between data engineering and data science. So first of all, it's a shared code base. So all of your pull reviews and your Git is made really simple, and you're able to share code. It's all in Python as well. So that's kind of a very decision that's made that we think it's better for data engineering and data science to share the same programming language and the same code base. And so that's kind of where Kedro starts with. And on top of that, it provides a whole bunch of tools and functionality to basically streamline a lot of the stuff that would take a lot of the time to get started on a project.
And what are the main feature sets that are present within Kedro and some of the abstractions that are built in to encourage best practices for a data project and reduce some of the friction that exists at the outset of a project where you're left with trying to decide on all the different tools and components and what the overall requirements are. So I'm just curious what the feature set is and how it plays into some of that analysis paralysis.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of like which libraries you use, we are agnostic in terms of what libraries you can use. It's a very open-ended platform. So whether you use whichever modeling libraries you use, whether it's TensorFlow or scikit-learn or whatever, there's not an opinion in that sense. Where there is an opinion is on certain best practices, what we consider best practice for software development. And this includes stuff like documentation. So documentation is built in. There's a Kedro command line tool to produce the documentation for the code base. But it also goes a step further in the sense that we have a visualization tool called Kedro Viz, which takes a pipeline and provides a visual representation of the code, which is very helpful as well. I would say reusability, testability. So, I mentioned before about the data abstraction that it offers. I think this is an amazing feature that it offers, where we can have different environments, and in each environment we'll have data sets that we refer to by a certain name, but we can change the parameters of those data sets so that in our test environment they're pointing to one location, and then our QA or prod environments are pointing somewhere else. So those are the kind of configuration options it gives you to run the same pipeline on multiple environments. It makes it possible to test before deploying, et cetera, and to reuse parts of the code across for multiple purposes. So that's what I would say is the main feature set. There's lots of stuff that is in development now as well. So there's making more robust deployment options. So we have tools that incorporate Airflow and Docker and working on Kubernetes, but also deploying to like Databricks and giving clear guides on how to do that. There's also a data and code versioning feature that's actively being worked on to make that more robust. And that's kind of where we are in what features that we're prioritizing and that we have currently.
And as I mentioned earlier, this grew out of the patterns that you identified through a number of different client engagements at Quantum Black. And I'm curious how much of the culture and technical acumen of the people working there factored into the design and priorities of Kedro and some of the ways that it manifests.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things come to mind with that. So the first thing is Quantum Black. We provide, for those that don't know, we are a consulting firm that provides advanced analytics solutions to clients. And Quantum Black got its start in Formula One racing. So there's always been this aspect of solving really tough problems, but also coming up with a big impact in a short time and improving performance of organizations. So in that aspect, the culture really comes out in the fact of we have a short time to deliver this huge impact. We don't want to sacrifice code quality, documentation, all these kind of things. How can we build that into what we're developing so that we're able to kind of streamline those processes? So that's one way I would say that the culture or the history of Quantum Black has led to Kedro. The other thing I would say is that Quantum Black has a very cross collaborative culture. And we alluded to this before with DE and DS, data engineering and data science, working closely together in the same teams, working with the same code base, reviewing each other's code, and really just providing more eyes on code reviews and quality of the code. Another interesting thing about Quantum Black is that there is a strong design aesthetic as well. And so you'll see this in, as I mentioned, Kedro Viz, which is the visualization tool to see your pipeline and provides like a really interesting view of that. But I think it's beyond just the visual part of for the design. I think it comes into play in the actual design of the library and of the templates of how we've really stressed simplicity, whether it's the data abstraction or the folder organization. Everything is really, we use this term MISI, which is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. It's boiling things down to their ultimate parts. And I feel like that really comes through that simplicity in Kedro projects.
And the fact that this is oriented largely for client engagements is a benefit as well, because it means that by having this standardized approach with a lot of built-in boilerplate means that you're not wasting time trying to come up with new documentation and training regimens for handoff to the customer once the project is done and they need to be able to maintain it going forward.
Yeah, or feeling rushed to do those things at the end of a project, or it really kind of forces you into this right path where those things are considered from day one, and that you're getting quality at the end. Exactly.
And can you describe a bit about how Kedro itself is implemented and some of the evolution that it's undergone since it was first started, and some of the main libraries and language features that have been incorporated into the framework?
Sure, I can speak to that. So Kedro came about, I think I alluded to it before, about 2 years ago in a client engagement. We had a group of machine learning engineers that were just kind of frustrated doing these things that we're talking about, all the kind of boilerplate and standard activity that goes into a data pipeline. And so that's when they had the idea of creating this. And what I would say is that the main components, so there is what we call an IO layer. And that's what I mentioned about the data abstraction. And what that is, as I mentioned, you can create multiple environments. For each environment, you have a YAML file where you can specify that my data set points to a certain folder, to a certain file type, whether CSV, Parquet, et cetera, or it could be a cloud-based data set as well. And that was part of the original vision, this IO layer. That and the pipeline and the templating of the code kind of were the three original features. And that's kind of remained the core of Kedro. And I think what has happened since then is we've used it with more and more clients, so dozens of clients. And it's just gotten more mature, and we've built some functionality on top of that. So, for example, in those data sets to have versioning. So the ability to version data sets, we now have that was kind of added on, as we went along. And, and listen, the feature requests are continue to come. We're working on, for example, Dask support, which is coming next, making a Kedro API for extensibility, reusable pipelines. But I think the core of the functionality is what has been there at the beginning, and we've kind of built all these layers on top of that to make things easier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I find it interesting that there has been a recent movement towards building a abstraction layer for the data programming piece itself and separating that from the actual execution context, which is the opposite of how projects such as Airflow and Luigi and a lot of the more traditional ETL tools have been built, where everything is all in one framework. But now we have projects such as Kedro, which you're building, and the Prefect library and Dagster, which are focusing more on just what are the programming primitives and the overall logical flow, and then having a pluggable execution layer and scheduling layer so that you can mix and match what's already present in your environment. And I'm just curious what your experience has been on that front and what your thoughts are on the benefits of that approach versus how we have been dealing with things up until now.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a lot of points, but just to pull the thread a little bit, I think that there is a lot of approaches to this the problem that companies are facing. And I mean, essentially the problem is that data pipelines are hard. They're hard to build. They require a lot of resources. They're hard to deploy. And all of the approaches are kind of aimed at making that more simple. And I would say there's a couple different approaches. One approach that we've seen is, the rise of drag and drop or GUI tools to kind of create, more simplicity in ETL or feature engineering, et cetera. And I think the idea behind that has been to create more simplicity to, hey, we don't, it's hard to get resources for data engineering, for data science. Let's create drag and drop tools to make it easier. And at least my experience has been in the past working with clients has been that actually tends to add further complication. And so Kedro, we've taken a step back. We said, hey, we're not building a drag and drop tool. We're not making it simpler in that sense. We're not creating like lock-in into a tool that you have to use. We're just creating a way to organize your Python code. And we're still solving the same problem. We're making things simpler. We're taking a complex problem. We're boiling it down to what do you really need to do to achieve that? And trying to take all the kind of stuff that just takes time and energy and make it a lot simpler. So I think there has been a trend away from proprietary frameworks to open source. I think that there is still this push to simplify the data engineering and data science process, and we've seen that play out with whether it's drag and drop GUI tools or whether it's open source libraries or proprietary tools. I mean, the problem is very real. I think that the approach is going to be different. And we've taken a stand in how we think is a really effective way to solve that approach. So all these things are trends that are happening. I think the trend towards open source is also important. I think one thing that we're seeing among clients is a concern about lock-in. They don't want to be locked into a particular vendor. They don't want to be locked into a certain cloud provider. And so the ability to use, like you mentioned, these open source tools is a big movement where they are not locked into any particular company. So all these things are playing out, and we think that we're offering a good approach to simplify that process as well.
And the other benefit of having the programming layer be one piece and having everything else be pluggable is that you can isolate the logic from the actual execution context, which I'm sure makes it easier for the testing and validation. I'm curious what the overall approach looks like for running a integration test or unit test on a Kedro project, and any tooling that you have built into the framework to simplify that operation.
Yeah, that's a good point. We are integrated with PyTest. I I don't have specific examples I can give you, but I do know one approach that you can use, for example, in the data abstraction layer is having test data sets that you can run the pipeline on and run tests on the results as well. That's one approach we've seen. I think that the different testing approaches and bringing that to light more is something that we're working on to improve. But I think that the abstraction of the data layer makes it actually very easy to do, like you say, an integration test on a different environment with maybe a sample data set to test the results, et cetera. I think the data and code versioning will also help that as well, and that's something that's active in the feature roadmap. So yeah, these are all things that we've heard from clients and users and are looking to enhance and improve.
And another thing that you mentioned is the built-in support for integrating with different data sources for being able to pull it into your project. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about some of the sources that you have built in and the overall approach that you've taken to abstract out the core principles while still allowing for specific features of different storage backends.
Yeah, happy to explain that. So yes, we do have support for specific data connectors. So for local files, of course, you have like Parquet, CSV, Pickle, etc. And we do have like S3 and PySpark as well. We do have connectors for them. I think when you look at Kedro, the real benefit is maybe not the number of connectors per se, but the ability to extend and create custom connectors is really, really easy. So if you go to the Kedro docs, you'll see a section where it talks about the abstract data set. And that's kind of the core class that all of the data connectors are built on. And to extend it is really simple. It's just a load and a save method for a class. And so it's possible to extend. We've worked with clients, for example, that are using Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2. And, it could be some aspects of that might be different from Gen 1 or blob storage as well. And so it's really easy to extend the data connectors, the abstract data set to all these different, whether it's different cloud providers or different types of database, et cetera. So those are some of the ways that we've seen people leverage the data abstraction.
And I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about some of the ways that Kedro is differentiated from projects such as Prefect and Dagster, which I think are most analogous to what you're doing with Kedro, but also projects such as Airflow and other workflow management tools, particularly when it comes to things like handling failures and retries and building in some of the common error modes and recovery capabilities.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, in terms of, you mentioned Airflow, so Kedro integrates with Airflow. Kedro is just an organization of the pipeline. It's not a scheduler. So you could integrate it with Airflow, or you could schedule it via different options, via, for example, Data Factory, et cetera, or via a Databricks notebook. So it does integrate nicely with Airflow. In terms of the other projects you mentioned, I've never actually used those in any projects. I have looked at some of the documentation. I would say, for me, where Kedro stands out is its simplicity, in terms of, the way that the code is structured when you create a new Kedro project. The syntax that you use in constructing a pipeline, constructing nodes, etc. It's going to be very simple and elegant, and a lot of thought has gone into making it as simple as possible, and that's kind of where we have really leveraged. And so when also when you look at the data abstraction layer as well, I from what I've seen, there's definitely a lot of shared elements as well. So like visualization of the pipeline, et cetera, and certain principles are definitely shared across the other two that you mentioned. I would definitely, among Dagster, I've gotten a look at. I haven't seen the other one, but that's where I would say that Kedro has kind of put most of its effort in creating a really rich developer experience. So very easy to use, very simplified, as well as the richness of its data abstraction layer. That's where I'd say it stands out.
And when I was looking through, I noticed that Kedro is currently at, I think, the 0.14 release. I'm curious what you think is still missing for a 1.x release, and some of the aspects that are in the heaviest states of flux and change, and some of the effort that you've got for pushing toward a 1.x release.
Yeah. I think that the 1.x release is imminent. I think what the bar that we've set is that we want to continue to improve and enhance our versioning feature set. So data, not just data set versioning, but data and code versioning, so that you can truly reproduce any run. The other aspect is getting stability and feedback from users on the project templates, and we've introduced a context API. So I think we're still in the process of the iterative loop and getting feedback and stabilizing those features. What I mentioned before was at the core of Kedro, which is the main project template, the IO layer, and the pipeline. Those have remained very stable, and we do feel that those are very stable. But in terms of getting to a 1. Release, I think that's where we have set the bar, is getting full stability in the context API, and really getting to a very mature state with our versioning capabilities, data and code, etc.
And you mentioned that there is a plugin capability in Kedro and that you're working more towards a standardized approach to that. I'm curious what types of plugins are currently present, both ones that you've built with Quantum Black and some of the community contributed ones, and just how much engagement you've seen from users outside of Quantum Black.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So in terms of plugins, I believe I mentioned that there is a plugin for Docker, Kedro Docker. Obviously, there's the Viz, Kedro Viz, which provides the visualization of the pipeline. There's also Kedro Airflow. We have seen great contribution from the community. One of the contributions has been looking at creating reusable pipelines. So in other words, maybe not even from a data science perspective, but using the pipelining tool to create workflows that can be reproduced across multiple data sets. So we've seen Kedro being used in some interesting ways. We've seen it being adapted and used in academia and several universities. I just learned of this recently, that it's been adapted in Imperial College of London, Oxford University, University of Cape Town in South Africa, and they're using it to reproduce work for some machine learning papers. We've started to see more streaming examples leveraging Kafka. So I think people are using it in ways that we might not have anticipated. We're still in the process of working with the community and extending it in ways that people are requesting, and learning from the way that people are using it.
And what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you have seen it used?
So like the reusable pipelines, that was something that we hadn't considered to be used as basically a workflow template to run across different data sets. So that's something that we've started to see and start to incorporate. And like I said, the surprise at some of the adoption of how it's being used in academia was also a pleasant surprise as well.
And in your own experience of both working on Kedro and using it for projects, what have you found to be some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned in the process?
In terms of challenges, I mean, I really have had the opposite reaction, honestly. Like I came from a world without Kedro, and using some of these, for example, being on projects where using drag and drop tools, etc. And just the developer experience was horrendous. And honestly, it's more like a breath of fresh air, where I'm working directly with data scientists. We're sharing code. The code is organized. I know when I go into a new code repository, how things are structured and how I can explore the code. So for me, it's kind of resolved several challenges that I had before, if anything. I would say, it does take some time to get up to speed on some of the more advanced features. So, but once you have done that and are comfortable extending, for example, the abstract data set and creating custom data connectors, it can be really powerful and liberating, I would say.
What are the cases where Kedro is the wrong choice and you might need to use some other approach or some other framework?
Yeah, I think there are two situations when that applies. So one is if an organization is not interested in using Python, right? And we believe there's a very strong case for why Python is an excellent programming language to use for advanced analytics. But some organizations may have invested elsewhere in different languages, and in that situation, it might not be right, especially if there's not interested in adopting to Python. So that's one. And the other, I think I alluded it to before, if an organization has gone 100% invested in a drag and drop framework, I mean, that's not what Kedro is, right? And so, I have seen certain organizations go in thinking that this is going to either increase the efficiency of their data engineering or resolve the need to hire data engineering talent. I'm skeptical, but if an organization has that mindset, they're going to use those drag and drop tools. So, I mean, those are two situations where Kedro just wouldn't apply.
And are there any other aspects of Kedro or the overall life cycle of data projects that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we start to close out the show?
I think we covered a lot. I mean, we talked about the trend towards open source, the trend away from vendor lock-in, which is kind of producing that, the move in some of the technology to bring data science and data engineering closer, especially in regards to Python and PySpark. We talked about the difference of, the drag and drop approach versus the clean and organized code approach to data engineering. So I feel like we talked a lot about the industry, and I hope I was able to present, what I think Kedro has to offer in that regards.
Yeah, it definitely looks like a very well thought through and well put together framework. I'm excited to see how it continues to evolve and grow as you head towards a 1.x release and beyond, and see what sorts of adoption it is able to accrue as you add more capabilities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So for anybody who wants to follow along with the work that you're doing and get in touch, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as a final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the $1 million question, right? I think you have a lot of investment in startups and a lot of investment in projects to make it easier for companies to get insight out of their data. And, there's multiple approaches to it. I think that it's still an unresolved problem because we do have a shortage of talent, and it's just an incredible need across multiple industries to leverage AI, to leverage analytics, and use it to improve their performance. So I don't have the answer. I think it's still something that we're all working towards, and it's something that we're working on at Quantum Black for sure.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and discuss the work that you've been doing on Kedro at Quantum Black. It's definitely an interesting framework, and as I said, I'm excited to see how it continues, and I'll probably be giving it a try for my own work fairly soon. So thank you for all of your efforts on that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tobias. It's been a pleasure, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, podcast.init, at pythonpodcast.com to learn about the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. And visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. If you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.